Thanks to tuning into our education webinar series. We'll begin in just a moment. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the April Prestige Global Meeting Sources Education Webinar Series, where we explore topics to empower you with knowledge and tools to thrive in your career and your life. I'm your host, Sasha Andreev, and I'm very excited to explore a very useful topic today, which we're calling the pre-production advantage, how the best events are won before loaded. Now, if this is your first time here, we're thrilled to have you. And if you've joined us for a previous webinar, welcome back. We're so glad to have you here today. Now, at Prestige, we provide full service meetings and event support for event planners. We make our clients' lives easier with site selection, event logistics, housing and flight management, creative marketing, and personalized on-site support. We collaborate with our global network of hospitality partners, all for your success. And part of our mission is to keep you informed and empowered. So that is how this webinar series was born. So every month, we invite guests from our vast network to share their expertise on subjects that affect your professional and sometimes even your personal lives. And with this month's topic, I'm very excited to introduce a special guest who's going to be talking about something that, for me, as someone who appears on the stages of a lot of events, a very important subject. So I would love to welcome today Tim Altbaum, CEO of Vario. Before I bring him up, I want to tell you a little bit about him. If you haven't met him before, Tim is the CEO of Vario, which is a premier event production and technology company that provides pre-production preparation, AV, and event technology needs for in-person and hybrid events to an international roster of clients. He holds a master's degree in network security, a Bachelor of Science in physiology and neuroscience, and is a past president for the DFW chapter of MPI, where he was awarded Community Leader of the Year. Tim has also been recognized with a Catalyst Award by Smart Meetings Magazine for his contribution to the industry. Tim also holds CSEP, CMP, HMCC, and CMM designations, and with nearly 30 years in the meetings and event industry, he's a highly regarded thought leader and futurist. I am so excited to bring Tim to the screen and have him join us for our webinar. Welcome, Tim.
Welcome, Sasha, and thank you for not reading my long bio.
Well, you have a lot of accomplishments, obviously, in the industry in a variety of ways. So I'm very excited to actually talk to you about sort of this technical aspect of pre-production, because a lot of folks don't think of their events as productions. We think of productions as theater, of grand conferences. When it comes to especially smaller events, I imagine some folks don't think, well, I don't really need to do that much with pre-production because our AV team knows what they're doing. We're going to come the day of, give them our little thumb drives, and we're good to go. Why is the subject that you're going to be talking about today so important?
Well, you bring up a very valid comment in that most people think their events are not a production. They're fairly simple or straightforward. And really, I want to dispel that myth that any event can be run like a production, not meaning to complicate it, but to make it run smoothly, effortlessly, and have the meeting planner not pulling her hair out every 5 minutes when something goes wrong. So that's why I'm here to talk about the value you can bring to your stakeholders by having a good pre-production process.
Well, I'm also very excited to hear about it because I think whether you are behind the scenes or even on stage, knowing certain things to look for or to consider as you're having those pre-production meetings will just lead to a smoother event for everyone. So this is going to be as useful for me as for all of our viewers today. Now, before I let you start, I do want to remind everybody that if you do have a question during the presentation, there is a Q&A function below to message us, and that way we'll log your question and address it after Tim's presentation. We also have the chat open to everyone, so feel free to comment and interact, and we'll be watching that as well. And if you've got your phones handy, keep them around, because at the beginning of the presentation, Tim is going to be doing a quick poll with an on-screen QR code. So your phone might come in useful during his presentation. Now, if you know somebody who wasn't able to join us today, or if you think this is something that you want to share with a colleague who's not here, we are recording this, and it will be made available for viewing on the Prestige Global Meeting Sources YouTube channel, so you can reference it and share it later. All right, Tim, I'm going to let you go with your presentation, and then I'm excited to chat with you after the fact.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sasha. Let me start sharing my screen and we'll get going here. All right. Can you just confirm everybody sees my screen and then I'll go?
We can see it.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, sir. Again, we're here to talk about the pre-production advantage. Why should we spend time pre-event ensuring that things will run smoothly while we're at the event? So let's go ahead and level set. When is your event won? I think that's a really important question. When do you feel like you've succeeded in putting on this meeting, event, whatever you call this program? When have you succeeded? And I think that people think that, oh, once we start the load in, I feel so much better. Or once the rehearsals are over, we're good. Or once that first presenter hits the stage and everything is working, we're in a great spot. Well, the reality is that's not when your event is won. Your event needs to be won well before that. So when you're on site, that's the execution of the event. I always say to my friends and clients, 90% of the work is done before we even hit the stage, before you even get on show site, or before you even start the program off. Because execution is when is definitely the on-site portion. That's not the strategy, the pre-production. By the load-in time, pretty much everything is decided. Unless there's something that pops up, you really don't have a ton of flexibility once the program begins to make major changes. So the outcomes of your programs are so much better, and the results are definitely part of your choices made early on in the process. So let's talk about a poll. Make sure that you got your phone out, as Sasha mentioned. If you could scan this QR code, tell me, when is the ideal time to contract your AV or production partner? And I will address the differences in the two, but let's just assume it's one and the same. And if this is working correctly, when you scan this and you answer, I should see those results live. If this is, oh, it is working. All right, great. I love it when technology works. We've got a couple of people probably from my team that are selecting 6 months out, which is great. But let's see if there's anybody else that has a different opinion. We'll give it about 30 seconds because I can see a couple of folks have responded. But I think this is a really important question to understand when you should be booking your partner. And as a couple of folks 3 months out at the inception of the program, or 6 months out from the event, depending on when that actually happens. Really, the answer is, and I appreciate you guys taking your phones out for this, it really should be at the inception of the program. When you have been handed this piece of business, if it's an internal, or this event, if it's an externally facing, when you've been handed this from your higher ups, whoever that might be, that's when you need to start thinking about AV and the production. And let me explain why. Thank you again for taking part of that poll. So basic AV is what makes your event function. Sasha brought up at the top, not everybody feels like their event is a production. And oftentimes we are, as an outside third-party production company, our number one competition is whomever is the in-house audiovisual company at the hotel. There's third parties and there are in-house. Most important is, what does basic AV mean and what does full production mean? Well, sometimes production can be just because of the folks that are involved, the level of stakeholder. It's a production because of the high touch. Whereas basic AV might just be Well, we just need a few screens in the room because we have presentations. Our team will just bring thumb drives, as Sasha mentioned, and we're okay if there's a blue screen in between presentation one and presentation two. Well, basic AV just is what you need for your event to actually function. But production is what makes it memorable. Production is so much different, and it doesn't matter if it's just two screens or if it's a giant LED wall. You can still have production in what you consider as a basic AV event. So basic AV is really just about the equipment and executing the program. Whereas when you're thinking about production and subsequently then pre-production, it's about the strategy behind the program. It's the storytelling. It's designing an experience for the attendees. And that doesn't mean you have to have a huge budget because you're designing an experience. You just have to think of an internal stakeholder meeting the same way you might think of a customer facing program where you're trying to earn more sales. You have to think of them the same way, that you're still producing an experience for both audience. So the difference between simply having sound and screens in a room versus using those tools to create moments that actually engage your audience and has a lasting impression, that's the difference between just I need basic AV and I really truly want to produce something that's memorable. And again, that's where pre-production comes in and why we are talking about this today. So bringing in AV early, the pre-production process. Again, talking about the majority of clients who are working with an in-house team because they have, quote, simple needs. When you're working with an in-house team, you're typically asking them for a quote a couple of weeks from the program, even though you've been planning it for 6 months or a year. And then you receive said quote from the salesperson, and you may not actually meet anyone who's going to be on site at your event until you're literally at your event. And you're hoping that what was translated in a sales conversation gets passed down to the people, the men or women who are working your actual program. The project manager, perhaps there's a technical director, an audio engineer, video engineer, etc. So that's the typical flow. And so we don't think of that as pre-production. I sent them my needs. They sent me a quote, and I'll see you next Tuesday or 6 Tuesdays from now when we load in. Well, pre-production is so much more than that. And here's why. So AV decisions impact your room layout, their content, the content flow, your budget, and even the attendee experience. All of that is decided by what the AV is in the room. When someone comes to us, and I think I have this on a future slide, and they already have all of their room sets and they know what rooms are going to be what and how it's going to be laid out, we're simply responding. We're reacting to what they have designed. Versus if you bring in a partner early, you can start to say, what is the best usage of these spaces for the goals that we are trying to accomplish? So if you brought in the AV company after all those decisions have been made, you're no longer designing the experience. You're just adapting to the constraints that have been set by the rooms. So early involvement gives you options, and late involvement gives you limitations. Again, doesn't matter if this is a simple AV program or a very, very highly produced program. What's most important is what the outcome is. And that's where pre-production comes along. This is a little bit of a fun slide. The next two, actually, I'm not expecting an answer, but what's the difference between the picture on the left and the picture on the right in this event? Absolutely nothing. The difference is we had to produce this event in 4 weeks. This is obviously the same event. This was about a $75,000 budget, so not a huge astronomical budget, but this was brought to us 4 weeks before the program. You can see it's what I would consider fairly straightforward. Some drape, some stage chairs, a podium or lectern, left and right screen. And then what you're seeing is a picture from the front of house behind the technician's desk of what they're seeing on the screens or what the next slides are going to be. Many people in this room on this webinar and the folks that watch this online later, this is what AV means to you. We just need a couple of screens, some microphones, etc. We were able to produce this meeting in 4 weeks, and most companies should be able to produce this event in 4 weeks because it is fairly straightforward. Did we have the proper pre-production ramp-up time that we would have requested? 4 months, 6 months, et cetera, to make sure the run of show was dialed in. We knew who all the presenters were, they've rehearsed, et cetera. We would have loved to have that, but we didn't, and the program was still successful. Many of your programs where you're utilizing an in-house audiovisual team are exactly this. About 4 or 5 weeks out, we got our quote, signed the contract, and we'll see that team on site. Now, the difference is that we had lots of pre-production calls to ensure that this moved flawlessly and worked well. But most in-houses and some other production teams don't always go through that process. Now, same question, what's the difference between picture one and picture two? Absolutely nothing. But this particular event had a $200,000 budget. The in-house quoted almost 300,000, 275,000. We were contracted on March 17th. We wrote the contract the next day on the 18th, and we loaded it on April 6th. This is last year, not this year. So this event was called from a phone call to us, fully executed from load to load in to end of the show in 3.5 weeks on a $200,000 program. Again, about 275 if they would have gone with the in-house team. And this event would not have worked if we didn't have very, very stringent processes in which we manage pre-production. This one was a production. Musicians, walk on, walk off, everything you can think of, tons of rigging. And the point of these pictures is without the pre-production efforts, meaning our project manager on once a week, if not twice a week, calls with their team members, with their marketing team, and working with the in-house who controls the rigging and the power. If we didn't have all of those precursor calls multiple times leading up to these events, it could have been a tragedy. So while this was not our typical 6-9 month lead time, we were still able to be successful because of the pre-production process. What does the pre-production process actually mean? I'll show you that here in a moment. But the real cost of a poor pre-production, other than microphones not working and the scenic looking bad, or not, the pieces not actually getting in town for the event in time because we didn't have a chance to get them ordered in time. But budgets, number one, when you are rushing, when you are putting an event together days or weeks before load in, you might be subject to limited vendors, rush fees, last minute changes. From a labor standpoint, we are always trying to get our employee A team on every single event that we possibly can. Then if those folks are already booked on something, we're going to go to our trusted resources of contract labor, who are we consider the A team, but they're not employees. And then, as you can imagine, it trickles down from there. The same thing's happening if you're contracting an in-house team. They may not have their best and brightest folks available because of the timing. So that's why number two is labor. If we don't have enough time, limited, highly skilled technicians equals more staff needed for the same scope. What do I mean by that? We have a gentleman on our team who is a highly, highly experienced video engineer. He can run 5 laptops and switch cameras at the same time because he's just that good. That really should be, in most shows, 2 people, if not 3 people. And so you may have extra labor on your program, or the flip side of that, and worse than that, is not enough labor to successfully execute the program because of last minute bookings and not booking and pre-producing your event for the weeks leading up to it. And then, of course, the experience of the attendee. I think almost all of us have to think about experience of the attendee when we're planning a program, a meeting, an event, et cetera. If it's just a generic design of 2 screens, some black or white drape, if it seems choppy, we did the general session, then we had this weird lull, and then there was a breakout, and then they did a trade show. If it didn't flow correctly, that experience also goes away, and you miss the wow moments. So that is the true cost of not pre-producing, not spending the time and effort to ensure you're considering the skilled labor, your budgetary constraints, as well as the experience of your attendees. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to spend more the closer you get to the date because availability of equipment and people goes down. So great partners brought in late can limit the impact of the event. So timing equals talent. Early involvement, we can act strategically. We're pre-producing, we're talking through every single possible scenario, plan A, plan B, plan C. Late involvement, it's really just, here's what we need. Can you guys get it done? And that's a challenge for a planner, is that you're coming basically saying, we don't have flexibility. We don't have that room 2 hours in advance, 4 hours in advance, the day before anymore. Now we're limited on what we can actually rig, if anything. We're limited on what we can do because we are at a moment where we don't have any other choice. So it's not only who you hire for your team, but it's when you bring them in. And why is that? Because labor is oftentimes 35, if not up to 50% of the cost of your quote. And that is because labor is one of the most expensive parts of any AV company's repertoire. All AV companies have equipment. All AV companies can source extra equipment when they run out, or if they're not going to have enough, or they need to double up specific areas. But some of these key roles you should start thinking about as adding value to your program. The number one is the project manager. The project manager is your pre-production success story. He or she is with you from the inception of the contract or program all the way through to being on site and executing the program and having the send off at the very end, and hopefully drinks at the bar when the loadout is done. That is your project manager. That is the success story to make sure your program has everything buttoned up. And then more technical events will also have a technical director. You'll need your AV technicians, your audio, video, your lighting technicians, and then of course your set and strike crew. And generally, there's quite a bit more people at the set and strike crew levels than there are availabilities for project managers and technical directors. So again, it gets back to timing. So here are some major decisions that can change your event, which are part of this pre-production. If you don't have these particular items in the time to execute them, it's going to affect the outcome of your program. So the room layout and flow, I already alluded to that. If you have a bunch of ballroom space and you haven't decided how you're going to use it yet, let us work backwards from your goal to what the set should look like. Your content. So many times you've got breakouts and maybe you have a panel in one room followed by, and the other room has a bunch of solo presenters, but then in the other room you want to have a panel, but you didn't decide that until 2 weeks before load in. And now we're having to add 5 microphones because you don't have the flexibility to put all the panels in one breakout space and all the solo presenters in their own breakout space because we decided these things late. That is part of content structure. And then, of course, I talked budget. Everyone comes with a budget. Know you're always going to spend more the closer it gets to the date of your event. And then, of course, when you engage with your partner, we are currently working on an RFP, a very, very large one, bigger than either of those two I just showed you, which is due on Monday. They'll make their decision by Wednesday, and then we load in 3 weeks from that day. Well, I'm having a hard time in the month of May finding highly skilled technicians, TDs, project managers, et cetera, who are not already out on another program. And then, of course, venue constraints. If you haven't booked your venue yet, that's typically the hardest problem. And that's where Prestige comes into play. Because while I'm sure they don't like to be called a month before saying, could you find us a space that we can do 250 room nights plus 6,000 square feet of meeting space? But I'm sure they'd love the challenge. But the more time we all have, the better. So what does good pre-production actually look like? Folks are like, oh my gosh, he's just talking on and on about this pre-production thing. I don't have the time for 56 meetings per month. It's not endless planning calls. They think that it's that. It's not writing so many different documents or run a show, all of these different spreadsheets that I don't have time for. It's just slowing down my process. Wrong. If we can create these documents, if we can create a pre-production schedule, which a good project manager will do for you, you'll make the right decisions earlier. In the meeting planning space, you're deciding on food and beverage menus, transportation, flights, all of these things that you have on your plate. Again, another plug for Prestige. They're there for you to take some of that off. But if you don't have a team of 10 working for you, let, at least from the production side, a tried and true project manager help you to align your stakeholders, reduce that rework of the diagram multiple times because we've changed now how many people need to be sat in that space and they're no longer in rounds, they're now in crescents or classroom. You know all of these things as they happen, but bringing someone on early to help you with the pre-production will reduce all of those things. So let's talk about the life cycle. So that poll earlier, many of you had said, 3 months out, 6 months out, et cetera. But let's talk about phase one, that upper left. So 6 to 12 months out is where the foundation for your program gets set. And it's honestly where a lot of the events are either set up for success or they start to drift. So one of the most important things is to define what success actually looks like. I keep saying an internal stakeholders meeting or a client facing, whether it's a dinner, whether it's a giant 700-person meeting, what does the success look like? Does that mean more leads in your CRM? Does that mean happier business or sales folks because they got to go golfing all week long? So what does success look like? And not just the logistics of how you're getting them there, but what are the outcomes that you're shooting for? Align all the stakeholders, right? Make sure that they understand what success looks like and that you are doing everything towards making their goals one or satisfying, I should say, their goals, and understand the audience. Is it internal? Is it external? And if this phase is not clear to you, then we have a problem. But if it is, if we can make it clear, then you will be set up for success and be proactive versus reactive. The next one up to the upper right is that 4 to 8 months out. So the design phase, the strategy phase. So again, this could be compressed if we don't have a full year to work together, but this is where you translate those goals and outcomes into what the actual experience looks like. So how does the content flow? Are we going keynote to breakout to lunch to keynote? All of those decisions impact the experience, and let the pre-production process, working with a good team, help you get there. Now, what does the room feel like? Is it just a bunch of lights? Is it a bunch of drape? Are we doing something unique with our scenic, with our branding? Where are we investing our budget? We always get well, I don't really know what our budget is. Can you just give me your best? Well, that's fine. If you can't or won't, or if your budget is the entire event and you don't know how much to carve out for the AV portion, that's totally understandable as well. But know that just as in car buying, when you go buy a model, whatever, there's typically the LE, the LX, the SX, the SE, and the top of the line, 5 different versions of the same darn car. It all depends on what bells and whistles are on the inside. Well, production or AV is the exact same way. You can have the base model, but you can have all of these iterations of the base model. So having a budget range is certainly helpful. But again, in this phase two, that's where the early technical decisions become really valuable, because you're designing with the possibilities, all the things you can do versus working with constraints because you're limited. The third phase down in the bottom right, now you're in the technical planning. So we're now just about 2 months out, 3 months out. And this is where we're starting to get to the execution. All of these are still being done before we're on site. Creating a run of show, putting all the equipment and labor together to make sure that we have the right amount of people and equipment in every space, coordinating with your other vendors, the in-house who's in charge of rigging. Perhaps there's some F&B considerations that we need to be in touch with your conference services manager. So there's a lot of things your production manager can do, or your project manager, depending on the company and their terminology, that will help to alleviate these challenges and issues as you're getting closer to execution. So this is where the efficiency happens in this third phase. If the earlier phases were strong, then this phase is even more of a challenge. But ultimately, if we've been able to work through those first two into this third, we should be set up for success, which is now that last box on the lower left in yellow. And at this point, we're no longer asking what ifs. We're not designing the experience. We're just refining what we've already planned. We're looking at the content. Do we have the slides? Are there going to be videos embedded or not? Are the speakers prepped and ready? Do we have contingency plans in case X, Y, or Z happens? And who's the show caller? Who's making the final decision on site if the stakeholders aren't in the room and we have to pull the trigger? So this phase is really where we're tightening things up and not scrambling. And just to go back to the whole purpose of this conversation, this is what pre-production actually is. It's all of this thought process. It's all of this planning. That's what we're doing during pre-production. It's not happening on site when everything is moving at a mile a minute. So a good production company, just to kind of give you an analogy, acts like a general contractor. An event is a temporary build. It's a temporary infrastructure. We're bringing everything in, whether it be lights and sound and people. It's a temporary building that we are creating. So the pre-production phase is all the blueprinting and the permitting. And do we have the right ADA staging? Do we have all of these things? And it's basically a run through of your, I'm going to go back to the general contractor creating a building. It's everything before you actually put shovels in the ground. Again, 90% of the building that's going to be resurrected or created is done in the planning and permitting phase, zoning, planning, permitting, for those that have ever been in the construction industry. And then once we're on site is when we build and execute the program. So the project manager who's assisting you through all of this, not the equipment, is really what determines your success. Because the equipment's going to be there. It's really all of the work that went into it. So my last two slides here. So what is the advantage of pre-production? By the time you walk into the room on your event day, your show day, whatever you're calling it, you should have already won. You should already feel comfortable, relaxed, and ready to just enjoy what you've spent the last 2 to 6 months or longer building, because you've made better decisions earlier. You've have fewer compromises or last minute, oh no, we have to change this, which means better execution on the event day. And hopefully that means less stress for you. So when AV comes in late, you're often locked into a room layout, limited by the infrastructure in the venue. You're forced into reactive decisions. It means fewer creative options and opportunities, more inefficient labor, sometimes even higher costs because you have to work around those constraints. So ultimately, late AV involvement doesn't just make things harder. It actually limits what's possible, and it typically raises the budget, raises the pricing. So understand the value of pre-production, whether you're working with an in-house team, an outside third-party production company, or your own internal AV folks, which some companies have. Ensure that pre-production and the process that goes around it is well thought out. And if you don't have the tools or the people to make that happen, that's why a company like ours is partnered with Prestige, because we want to bring that to you and to your programs. This QR code takes you to my contact information, but obviously you probably have my email address by now. And Sasha, that's all I've got.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. That was very useful. And actually, as you were speaking, like I had some questions in mind. And folks, if you do have questions, the chat is open. So you're welcome to use it to ask those questions. But I want to dive into one right away. Obviously, pre-production is all about preparation. You know, they have the same beginning. But when you think about not being able to move everything earlier, depending on constraints, what would you say are the highest impact decisions that planners should prioritize in pre-production?
Sure. And this happens quite a bit when an executive makes a decision late on when and where this meeting needs to happen. And then your timeline is automatically condensed at no fault of your own. So what you just asked is what decisions should be made right away or should be put at the top of the list to ensure we don't run into some of these conundrums that I just spoke about. But the most important thing before I can even answer that question is to define the goal. Because if the goal is just to get everybody in the room so that we can talk at them for 5 hours or 2 days, and that the AV and the production and the look and feel is not high priority, then space designation and the way we're going to use the venue is important, but it's not make or break. But if this is a conference in which you have a trade show area that has to feed into a dining space that has to then feed into an actual ballroom space where the meetings are taking place, layout, the space allocation, and when those spaces are available for the AV team and your team to load in become top priority. Because I know from a sourcing perspective, if I'm one of the team members of Prestige, I may tell you, I found a venue. According to their website, they have the square footage that you need, and they also have the room nights that you need. That's great, but how is the square footage broken up? is the ballroom space large enough for your general session, or is it because they just have the total capacity of square footage, but they don't actually have the spaces that will work for your goals? So space allocation and the time we have to be in that space, because if they're squeezing you in between two different programs and you get the space at midnight, but your executives want to go on stage at 8 a.m., now we have a problem. So space allocation, room layout, and the timing around that becomes high priority.
That actually takes me into my next question, because when you think about space allocation and some of the things that are going to be present in that, that involves some of the partners. So if planners don't always control when partners are brought into this whole planning process, how can planners advocate internally for earlier pre-production involvement?
Well, anyone who's planned an event that something went noticeably wrong to a stakeholder knows the value of explaining why they wish they could have done things their way or differently. And when you're talking about the DMC who needs to come in and decorate the space, or the production team that's producing the meeting, and all of the ancillary or support staff, the support vendors around the success of the event, I think meeting planners just need to advocate to their stakeholders what could go wrong if they're not given the runway that they truly need. And unfortunately, in our meetings ecosystem, there are vendors and suppliers that are considered to be well down the food chain, and those decisions can come much later. But if you think about if gifting becomes, and I'm mentioning this because they're often further downstream, if gifting, for example, is an important part of your event, perhaps talking with your gifting supplier early could actually help trickle back up, and we can tie in the ideas that they have for the gifting experience into other elements of your program in consideration of what the DMC is planning on doing, what the production company is planning on doing. So if the meeting planner is able to explain that to their constituents, their stakeholders, their decision makers, and why this ecosystem exists, and there are decisions that need to be made early for the success of what they're trying to accomplish, then I think the meeting planner now has more clout and more clarity with their stakeholders.
Right. It's interesting. One of the sort of recurring themes I've heard in your presentation is, things cost less the earlier you get them involved, the earlier you bring certain elements in. But I also feel like sometimes you worry about the budget actually expanding because you're bringing in production earlier in the process. You're essentially paying people for their time earlier on. So how do you respond to this idea that bringing people in earlier will actually increase costs? Does that actually happen sometimes?
So about 4 or 5 years ago, when we started including a project manager's pre-production hours on our quotes, front and center, you're paying for 10 hours, 15, 20 hours of pre-production at this rate, is when the mentality started to shift of, oh, so you're not just delivering AV equipment that day and then setting it up with the team that day. You're actually investing your own time and people in logistics to make sure our event is successful. And if we have a window of time in pre-production to ensure that we line up the event window, this load in to load out, to be successful, your costs will be lower because we're not going to have these what ifs. Oh my gosh, we don't have enough labor in this room. We're down to microphones. What are we supposed to do? And we have to make a lot of last minute changes, even if that's the week before, the day before, because we didn't plan for it. We didn't plan for a plan B. We didn't plan for half of the people not being able to travel in because of weather or TSA. Pre-production allows you to do all and make all these contingencies. And if the contingencies are clearly laid out, we know what the cost escalation, if any, will be way in advance. And now we can budget for that.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. Lori Lynn Cartelloni has submitted a question. How do you support the argument for pre-production planning for mic issues or Wi-Fi issues, which incurs additional cost and isn't an issue unless it's an issue? Frequently on the front end, the discussion, it is hard to explain.
So this is also a vote of confidence for pre-production. So as an example, this RFP I was just mentioning that we're working on is at a military base. We will be sending an RF coordinator, meaning a person who understands radio frequencies, who will scan the room to understand what frequencies are being used by military, by EMS, and which frequencies are actually going to be available for us. This happens when you're doing an event in the middle of the desert. This happens when you're on the strip in Las Vegas. But frequency coordination, just talking about the mic issues that Lori brought up, the mic issues can always be solved utilizing pre-production and understanding what frequencies are available, coordinating with the property, what frequencies do their in-house use versus what frequencies can we use. Now, does that solve all problems? No. I've been to plenty of events where you do all of this, you walk on stage and the mic stops working. In your pre-production, what is your backup plan to that? Do you have an A2 or a second audio person standing behind stage holding a backup microphone, or is there one under the lectern should the primary microphone kick out at the very beginning? That's all decided in pre-production. That is training, that is rehearsing with your presenters. Here's the backup microphone. Sally's going to be off to the side if she needs to bring it up to you. Otherwise, there's one under the podium there. Mic issues will happen. It happens to us even if we've done all this pre-planning, but it's the backup emergency situation that you need to be on top of. And to Lori's question regarding the Wi-Fi, fortunately, but unfortunately, Wi-Fi 99% of the time is managed by the in-house. And by managed by the in-house, that means there's someone who has the app on their phone or on their laptop that can push a button and allocate bandwidth towards your event and push another button and set up your SSID. But what they can't do is actually troubleshoot the network because most hotels don't have network engineers on property. That's all handled at an offsite on a phone call if the you know what hits the fan. So with Wi-Fi primarily, it is not something, it is a skill level, I should say. Wi-Fi can go down, but there's no one on property unless this is a large Gaylord Opryland kind of, 700, whatever the size is, you know what I mean. If it's a really large property and Wi-Fi is a very important aspect, or internet in general, ask that the staff have a network engineer on property, because you don't want them to have to call someone who then has to call someone that has to log in to then try to figure things out.
Right. Lori, thank you so much for this question. We'll give you a couple, folks, another moment if you want to ask something else, but something that I actually thought of, and I wonder if you have thoughts on this yourself. I was at an event that I was hosting, and the thought of the idea of planning the space and what the tech needs are available, we were in a space that instead of having a large screen, there were lots of monitors. But it seems like that actually wasn't communicated to maybe some of the presenters because their slides had text that was so small that if it had been on a large projection screen, would have been easily readable by the attendees. But because it was small screens strewn throughout the room, a lot of people weren't actually able to see what was in that presentation. So it makes me wonder whether part of pre-production is actually cluing in everyone who's going to be on stage what those tech needs or availabilities are so they can prepare for them to have the biggest impact on the attendees, especially from a presentation standpoint.
I swear you must have been on one of our pre-production calls, because the question our project managers always ask is, what type of content are we expecting to see on the screens? Is it lots of text? Is it video? Is it pictures, PowerPoint, etc.? And then we will give them a mock-up. Well, here is your 16-foot by 9-foot screens with font 12 points, a 12-point font, I should say, on the screens. And you can see that if you're 12 rows back, you're going to struggle seeing that. So perhaps we need to talk to the presenters and their designs of the slide decks and maybe take some of that text off, or we need larger screens. So to your point, again, in pre-production, we could also use some technology that allows the attendees to see what's on the slide on the screen on their mobile phone, so that it's simultaneously being broadcast to their mobile phone and the screen, and now they're not stressing about looking at small font. So it's all done in the pre-production.
Right. It's amazing how many things that you don't think of until it's too late. So that's the benefit of pre-production, the benefit of rehearsal, the benefit of thinking, all of these things. Well, Tim, obviously, if folks want to get in touch with you, you had your QR code up. Obviously, you can contact your Prestige account manager if you want to get in touch with Tim and utilize the many services that Vario Productions offers. But Tim, I really appreciate your time. This was really informative.
Excellent. I appreciate y'all having me.
All right. Well, you have such a pedigree of subject matter that I have a feeling we're going to see you again.
I sure hope so. Thanks,
All
Sasha.
right. Take care, Tim. Like I said, please contact your account manager if you want to get in touch with Tim. And I want to encourage you all to take a look at your calendars for May 14th, because we are going to bring in Mara Zhang from Weldem and Iconic Destinations Collective, who's going to be speaking about designing human-centered experiences for meetings and incentives, which is something I certainly always think about in creating the human connection as somebody who goes on stage. Now, if you want to see our full schedule for the year, please scan this QR code so you can see the latest roster of upcoming guests. And if you have an idea for a webinar, or perhaps you are a subject matter expert who wants to speak on something, please contact your Prestige account manager, because we're always looking for more subjects that we can do webinars about. So I want to thank you all for joining me today. This was such an interesting subject, and I look forward to seeing you all on May 14th. Until then, have a great day, have a great weekend, and I'll see you all next month. Bye, everybody.